So we're very excited to hear from our next speaker. I'm sure he has had a tremendous week with Eth2, another dear friend of ChainSafe's, Danny Ryan, speaking about Eth2 Beacon Chain Launch and beyond. Danny, why don't you go ahead and turn on your camera and mic and join me on the main stage?
Yeah, cool. You can see and hear me, right?
I certainly can. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm moderately prepared and a little bit tired, but I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome. Well, the main stage is yours.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. Eth2 Beacon Chain launch yesterday. It's been going for, 29 hours and going pretty well. And I'm going to talk to you about what happened over the past couple of months and also turn an eye towards the future. Yeah, thanks for having me. So in the past 24 hours, we did launch the Eth2 Beacon Chain. And this, if you want to check it out, there's a couple of block explorers. I might talk about some of the metrics there. So you can go to Beacon Chain, BeaconChain.in to check out the Beacon Chain live. And from there, dig around some cool stuff going on. But I'll talk about a little bit what happened in the past few weeks and what happened yesterday, and we'll move on from there. So on November 4th, and I will give you a little bit more context further down the line on what the hell we're actually building and why, but really exciting month for everyone that's been involved in this like mini year project. There's well over 100 people, many entities working on this thing daily. On November 4th, the version 1 specs and the deposit contract were released. This kind of like set in stone what the initial parameters of this thing was going to be. And this deposit contract existed on a current Ethereum mainnet to allow for validators in this new proof of stake mechanism to submit deposits. We had to get to a minimum threshold of about 16,000 validators of 32 ETH each. So it's about 500,000 ETH to kick it off, at which point we did. We hit that on November 24th, and the Beacon Chain launched a week later, December 1st, yesterday. And so it was a little bit of a timid start. It was interesting. We had like a bunch of deposits probably in the first few hours, and then it was pretty slow. And over the course of about 2 weeks, we hit about a quarter of the threshold. And, some of us got a little nervous. Some people had unwavering confidence that this was going to be hit by November 24th. But some of us definitely were like, okay, what's the contingency plan? What do we need to do here? And it turns out that FOMO is real, and waiting until the last minute is also very extremely real and just part of humanity. So once we got to so the November 24th was this like earliest time this threshold could be met to hit set Genesis time. And if you you can go look at Etherscan. They have the deposit contract there. There's probably an easy way to find it. If you just Google the deposit contract, you find it. And you can look at like this threshold, and right around the November 20th, 21st, you got like a little bit of bump. And then the last 2 days going to the 24th, we saw this like, hockey stick thing, and the deposit contract getting pummeled with deposits. And by that threshold, it hit something like 600, 700,000 ETH, which on the morning of the 24th triggered Genesis to happen and allowed us to calculate the Genesis state and triggered Genesis of the Eth2 Beacon Chain to happen a week later. So it's fun. It was a pretty exciting moment to kind of have this uncertainty, and then all of a sudden this like wave of deposits. And since then it's been steady. I think we're at about 900,000 ETH in this deposit contract, and there's a queue. So if you didn't get in before Genesis, there's a queue in which your validators are let in. And I think that's a little bit over a week-long queue at this point. You can process 900 validator deposits per day. So what happened yesterday? Yesterday at 12 p.m. UTC, which if you were in the US was bright and early. It was 5 a.m. for me, although I couldn't sleep past 2 a.m., somewhere between excitement and anxiety. But the Beacon Chain, this new proof of stake consensus mechanism, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about and give you more context, launched. And this It launched quite successfully. There's a number of things we're kind of monitoring over the first about half hour of that launch. During the first 4 epochs are 6.4 minutes. If you opened up one of those block explorers, you'll see often things are kind of grouped in these epochs. And we saw finality very early. Finality is pretty crucial to these Byzantine fault tolerant proof of stake algorithms. It's really like the signal of health. It's really the signal of like whether this consensus mechanism is working properly. We had finality out the gate, had about 80% participation. 2/3 is really the critical number here for finality and for the safety threshold and protocol. But 80% is good. It's not perfect. We want to see 100% of validator participation, but it steadily climbed over the first few hours. We're sitting at about 97% actively at every epoch. And it's funny, a lot of that just had to do with minor configuration errors of validators. So people that had turned their nodes on and were attempting to validate, but maybe didn't load in their keys or something like that. So there's a lot of like little troubleshooting over the first few hours, but really exciting to see it strong out the gate and very strong now. One interesting thing is now that we have this proof of stake mechanism live, there's a lot of different metrics and analysis happening right now. It's pretty cursory, but I expect people to dig pretty deep in the coming months. But one interesting thing that we found out in the past 24 hours is that 450 of these validators, which is about 2% of them, actually haven't come online at all. So they haven't turned their nodes on, or maybe don't have access to their keys or something like that. Hopefully they do come on, but we're never going to get those last. If they never turn online, then there's always going to be about 450 validators that are just offline, and they're slowly losing some money. I think they've lost like 0.01 ETH right now, maybe 0.14. If they're offline for the entire year, they might lose something like 10 to 15% of their capital. Not catastrophic, but like I hope they turn the nodes on. So yeah, check out the block explorers. You can see 24 hours in, 29 hours in, this thing is healthy. It's running exactly as we'd like to see it. So that's very exciting. Validator distribution, so far, so good. Vitalik did a little bit of analysis because we have the source address of deposits from the existing Ethereum chain. We can make some assumptions that if you're depositing from the same source address, that you probably are the same entity, an exchange or an institutional player or an individual. And so I do have some fun graphs. I'll share them on Twitter after this. But essentially, you can see because of that FOMO into the Tuesday, that November 24th, in terms of the weekday of deposits, Tuesdays are the most popular. In terms of the number of entities that need to collude to reach 34%, which is kind of this like minimum to do some damage to the chain, it's 11 entities. The number needed to collude to reach 51%, the Nakamoto coefficient. This is 32 entities, and the number need to collude to reach 67%, which you can do a lot more damage at that point, is 102 entities. So these numbers are good. These numbers, I think, are better than probably most proof of work chains, maybe all. But it'd be very fascinating to monitor these and other types of decentralization metrics over the coming year. Hopefully they are good right now. Hopefully they get better, not worse. And if they do, we'll try to figure out why. Then there's the Herfendal Score, which is about 0.013, which is a measure of the amount of power kind of distributed across entities in an ecosystem. So if you have like 10 entities and they're all evenly split in terms of like market cap or something like that, then it has a pretty good score. But if you have 10 entities and one is 80% and the rest are summed to 20%, like that's a pretty bad score. It's 0.013 currently on these initial distribution metrics, which actually like it doesn't map quite from like an industry. This is a metric made for industries, but it shows like pretty robust competitiveness. This is kind of interesting. There's some more metrics, there's some more graphs. I'll share them later. It's probably not worth me going over them if you can't see them, but validator distributions, and we're excited to see how that changes over time. Something that's interesting about this launch, which is different than almost probably all other big launches these days, is that instead of just one production client implementing the protocol, we have 4. There are 4 live on this, production-ready clients live with validators on them, running on Eth2. So by 4 production clients, I mean like 4 independent, different language implementations of the protocol. I'll name them: Lighthouse, which is written in Rust by Sigma Prime; Nimbus, which is written in Nim, pretty nifty language, by status.im; Prism, which is written in Go by Prismatic Labs; and Eth2, which is written in Java by Consensus. These are all live on the network today, and all have validators, and actually are all performing well. We've had no fewer than like 9 different implementations over the past couple of years. Lodestar is another one that's near production ready, but is also focusing a lot on like tooling and developer things. It's written in JavaScript by none other than ChainSafe. But it's really exciting to have these many different implementations of the protocol. It makes things more difficult, certainly. I can tell you firsthand that getting 4 clients into consensus with each other is a little bit more painstaking process than just one, because consensus with yourself and consensus with clones of yourself shit's all hard, but like you leave out some dimensions of the hardness of the problem when you just have one implementation of the protocol. And so it has made things more difficult, but I would argue for much benefit to the network. First and foremost is just redundancy, in the sense that for the end user and for the network itself. If I'm a user, I'm running a validator today, and I have performance issues or any sort of critical bug or something like that, I can swap. I have 3 other choices, production-ready choices, to swap to. It also allows for building redundant setups. It also, if you have good distribution metrics, allows for the system to have redundancy in the event of failure of one. So for example, if no client is 1/3 of the network or greater than 1/3 of the network, then if that client goes down, has critical failure, the network can actually still provide a high quality of service by finalizing and continuing on. We're still trying to get a handle on these initial validator distribution, client distribution metrics. Our intuition is that Prism's probably over 50%, but we're not certain if it's over that 2/3 threshold. I don't think it is, based off of initial crawling. But crawling is interesting because we can understand the number of nodes on the network and the distribution, but we can't actually, through that basic crawling, understand the distribution of validators and economic value actually on those nodes. So interesting to check out. It's probably pretty heavy Prism, and then probably Lighthouse, and then a big drop off to Eth2 and Nimbus. If you're interested in running a validator, I highly recommend taking a look at some of these minority clients. Eth2 has proven itself to be very robust over testnets, and Nimbus is pretty interesting, and I expect to get a lot of love over the next couple of months because they actually run on one CPU and have something like 1/3 the memory requirements of the other nodes right now. So for a pretty resource constrained devices, and if you were looking at really optimizing that profitability as a hobbyist, Nimbus might be a great choice. So check it out. Multi-client makes it hard, but it also makes it fun. So what did we actually launch? If you're following crypto Twitter at all, you've seen there's been all sorts of fun conversations about taxes and all sorts of fun conversations about like, did Eth2 launch? What the hell does this thing even do? And those are all like, they're interesting conversations. If you like stop paying attention to the context of this whole thing and just look at this like minute event. So I'm going to give the context about what we launched and really what we plan on doing over the next couple of years. The Beacon Chain. The Beacon Chain launched. What the hell is the Beacon Chain? It's not the end manifestation of what we call Eth2 or what we call Serenity. It is the bootstrapping of a proof of stake consensus mechanism secured by Ether. And it's a sophisticated proof of stake consensus mechanism, meaning not only is it a proof of stake consensus mechanism, but it has some special properties that allow it to be quite sophisticated and to meet the needs of the Ethereum kind of upgrade roadmap over the next few years. First and foremost, it's highly decentralized in the sense that you can participate with this thing with just 32 Ether. That's, I don't know how much that is worth. It depends on the day. Something like $15,000. Used to be worth less, used to be worth more. But you can participate with as little as that amount. You can participate with many multiples of that amount. But you can also do so, especially at low numbers of validators. You can participate with consumer hardware. And so we don't see, especially now, we don't see like just a few highly sophisticated entities running on like incredibly powerful hardware and internet setups. We're seeing it's like a boon to the hobbyist community. There's a ton of people staking at home on old laptops, old servers, minimal cloud instances. I know Preston from Prismatic Labs is running his setup on a Raspberry Pi. So first and foremost, this mechanism that has been painstakingly been designed to be to allow for hobbyists and allow for decentralization. It also has been designed to support hundreds of thousands of consensus entities. When I say consensus entity, I mean in the actual consensus protocol, there's these like units of things called validators. In terms of actual nodes and in terms of actual users, I might run many of those consensus. But because so many of these consensus entities and can handle them efficiently in the protocol, we are setting up the stage to be able to do very scalable things with this consensus protocol. Namely using these entities to do random sampling across sharded data. I'll get into that a little bit more. But anyway, it's a highly sophisticated consensus mechanism. That is what we launched. What does it do today? If you've read crypto Twitter, people are probably like, but it doesn't do anything. And you're like, that's kind of the point. It doesn't do anything, except that it comes to consensus. It's a consensus mechanism. We're bootstrapping a consensus mechanism. It comes to consensus. It comes to consensus on itself. And when I say that's kind of the point is Ethereum is a tens of billion dollar ecosystem with a ton of economic activity on it. And so to prudently upgrade the guts of it, the consensus mechanism, what we're doing is we're not touching Ethereum today. We're not touching what is in production and live. We're bootstrapping something in parallel. And so it is by design that it doesn't do anything. And it is by design that currently it doesn't affect users. Because it would be crazy to hot swap proof of work for a proof of stake mechanism just like that without vetting it in production with real economic value. And so what is happening right now is this proof of stake consensus mechanism is bootstrapped in production, securing itself with no less than $500 million right now. In my expectation, probably many multiples of that over the next couple of years, where we can monitor, upgrade, and make sure this thing is ready to be Ethereum's new home. Because that's the end goal, is that what is Ethereum today lives and is controlled by this new consensus mechanism, the Beacon Chain, in the future. So one of the analogies I've kind of been working with recently is what we're doing. Okay, Ethereum today is a high-powered rocket, and we're all on this fucking ride, blasting into space, and it's powered by proof of work, and it works. And people can breathe in there, and people are like interacting in zero gravity in this rocket. But it's not really a sustainable place, and it's not really a scalable place to like be in the end run. So what we're doing while this rocket is getting into the out of the atmosphere is we're architecting a scalable, sophisticated space habitat, a sustainable place for this rocket to dock, and for what is Ethereum to exist in the long run. And so I have this cool visual on my slides of some like 80s space habitat graphics, which I'm really into. But we're building the space habitat that's sustainable. Ethereum's a rocket. It's still blasting up in space, but it's going to ultimately dock at the space habitat that we're building called Eth2. This this consensus mechanism, the beacon chain, at which point things are unified and sustainable. Still working on the analogy. So we built a consensus mechanism. It's in production. But what do we want to actually come to consensus on? Right now, it comes to consensus on itself, which is exciting because, as I said, it's a very sophisticated consensus mechanism. But ultimately, we want to come to consensus on other things, valuable things to users. And the two main things that we want to come to consensus on are Ethereum. So Ethereum today, what is often called like the 1x chain, where all the state and execution and transactions happen. We want to come to consensus on that. So one of the major upgrades that we're looking to do in the next 12 to 18 months is to hot swap the consensus mechanism of existing Ethereum for that of the beacon chain, so that proof of work can be deprecated once and for all. And the beacon chain, the consensus mechanism we've been bootstrapping, is now kind of in control of everything. Additionally, we want to come to consensus on shards. And first and foremost, shards that are just data, layer 1 data. We want to come to consensus on a ton of layer 1 data. And one of the properties of the beacon chain is that it can serve hundreds of thousands of these consensus entities, which then we can then do random sampling to come to consensus on all of this different sharded data. And one of the things that we want to do with this sharded data is to service the burgeoning rollup ecosystem for massive scalability through these layer 2 mechanisms. But layer 1 data is probably pretty exciting for other use cases, and I'm excited to see what you guys do with it. So those are the two big things we want to come to consensus on. We have a consensus mechanism. We're going to get it stable. It's looking pretty stable, looking good. We're going to kind of tinker with it and get it into like a very secure and robust place. And we're going to come to consensus on some cool shit. Other upgrades that we expect along the way is light client support. This is actually a pretty simple upgrade to the current beacon chain to make sure that light clients can be served as first-class citizens. There's a little bit of account and reward reform that make things a little bit more efficient and some minor tweaks to the way things are rewarded. There's some optimizations of processing in edge cases that we can make minor adjustments to the spec to handle. For example, when there are empty epochs, and if there were, say, 100 empty epochs, that might be a lot of load on your machine right now. So there are actually some like little consensus tricks that we can get in there and expect to over the next year to work on that. And to cap the maximum load. So in the event that there are greater than 1 million validators, there are maximum committee sizes so that all validators aren't doing all the work at all the time to cap the total load that would ever happen on a node. So a lot of little iterative things to work on over the year as things stabilize and as we're building out some of these more major upgrades. So TLDR is, what do we build? We built a consensus mechanism. It is in production. We're trying to vet it in production. We're trying to iterate and upgrade it in production, and ultimately use that consensus mechanism to come to consensus on things that are valuable for Ethereum, namely the current Ethereum chain and sharded data. Anyway, there's a lot of work to do. By no stretch of the imagination, there's a ton of work to do. But now's a good time to sit back, take a breath, smile a little bit, and I just want to say thank you to all of the incredible people that have been involved in this, and congratulations to the Ethereum community in general.
Thank you so much, Danny. What a tremendous achievement for the Ethereum ecosystem. Really, congratulations.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
We have some questions for you in our Q&A. First question is, how did you come to leading the most important project affecting Ethereum?
Honestly, I started working at the Ethereum Foundation on just doing some testing and little things here and there. And I started taking on more responsibility when I realized that way too many people went directly to Vitalik for everything. And I realized that I could often answer the questions instead of Vitalik, and I could make sure he had more time to work on the really, really hard problems. And it kind of snowballed from there. I'm technical enough. I do some research, I do some development, I do some spec writing, but I also really like communicating with people. So just it worked out. And honestly, I do have somewhat of this leading role, but I'm very confident that tomorrow I could disappear. I'm not really planning on it, but and this thing, there's dozens of teams working on this thing and hundreds of individuals that would take the charge. So awesome,
thank you so much. Another question: are we seeing validators being run at home or on premise or primarily in the cloud?
I'd like to do a crawl. Johnny Ray did a crawl of some test nets a while ago, and you can actually often correlate IPs with cloud providers, and then you assume if they're not a cloud provider, they're likely at home. So it'd be really interesting to get that. I do know, so the ETH Staker, there's an ETH Staker hobbyist community. It's incredibly active. There's like hundreds of people in there active all the time, and most of them are actually running on home setups. There's like a pretty strong ethos of getting off the cloud. But I don't really have a good feel on the mainnet distribution, so we'll see. I do think there's probably easily over 1,000 nodes on the network right now, and there's probably easily over 300 that are at home. But I don't have a good estimate beyond that, knowing that there's probably at least more than that. Awesome.
Last question. From what I understand, transfers have been disabled. When can we expect transfers on the Beacon chain?
Right. So transfers were initially added in the spec to essentially add for validator liquidity before this merge of the existing Ethereum chain into this new consensus mechanism. They were taken out primarily due because there was a bug found when, honestly, this is like well over a year ago, but we're launching soon, and we just found a bug in this mechanism. It's not critical. Let's take it out. So it was taken out because of that. It could be added back in, but I think does represent a reasonable amount of complexity to be added to the Beacon chain. Whereas if we're going to do a merge in about 12 months, then at that point, validators have liquidity through the mechanism of just kind of natively going back into normal user accounts. So it's kind of a balance between timing and complexity there. So I don't have a good feel. I think that at the start of the year, we're going to kind of be assessing all of these small upgrades, transfers maybe being one of them, and the larger ones, and get a feel for priorities and stuff moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Danny. I know it's been a hard week. It's an absolute pleasure to have you speaking with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care, guys.
Thanks. Take care.